By the time people in my office started joking that I needed clearance approval to buy my own coffee, I had already spent 3 weeks pouring it into a travel mug in my car before I came inside. That is how ridiculous it got. Not because I was embarrassed to buy myself a latte. Because I was tired of the look. That small, offended, baffled, half-playful look people gave me when I walked in with one drink instead of a tray. The look that said, "Oh. So you went. And you didn't think of us." That look changed the whole shape of my mornings. I started leaving the house earlier. Parking farther away. Using the side entrance. Switching cups. Once I even changed coffee shops for a week, which was extra insulting because the new place made terrible cold brew and charged more for it. All because I made one stupid mistake. I helped. That's the thing nobody tells you about office favors. They don't usually become expectations all at once. They become expectations by being easy twice. I had been stopping for coffee on the way to work for almost 2 years. Same route. Same plaza. Same left turn at the light. Same coffee place where the breakfast sandwiches were inconsistent enough to be annoying and convenient enough to win anyway. That stop belonged to me. It was 10 quiet minutes before the day started. Before fluorescent lights. Before Slack messages. Before invoices, deadlines, and the strange adult daycare energy of a mid-sized office where nobody was technically friends but everybody expected the performance of friendliness by 8:30. Then one Tuesday, my coworker Jess texted me while I was in line. "Any chance you can grab me an iced latte? I'll pay you when you get in." Jess sat right next to me. She borrowed pens and returned them. We bitched about meetings together. She was the kind of office close that feels real enough in the moment to override caution. So I said sure. No problem. I got her drink, came in, put it on her desk, and thought that would be the end of it. Instead, by 9:10, 3 more people had wandered over to my desk asking why I hadn't told them I was making a coffee run. Not angry. Worse. Amused and mildly put out. Like I had accidentally hosted a party and excluded them. I laughed and said I didn't know anyone else wanted anything. One of them said, "Well, next time ask." That should have irritated me more than it did. Because that sentence only sounds normal if you skip the part where nobody had ever assigned me that job. The next morning, I made my first real mistake. I tried to fix the vibe. That's how people like me get trapped. We don't just absorb inconvenience. We start engineering around other people's disappointment. So while I was driving, I dropped a message in the office group chat. Stopping for coffee if anyone wants something. I expected maybe 3 replies. I got 10. Not 10 normal replies either. Not, "Small coffee, plain bagel, thanks." No. 10 adult professionals instantly transformed into the sort of customers who make cashiers close their eyes for 1 second before smiling again. Jess wanted her usual with oat milk. Kevin wanted a large coffee, no room, plus a breakfast sandwich but not the bacon one if it looks dry. Ashley wanted an iced drink with half sweetener and extra foam. Greg wanted whatever's fastest unless they still have that maple thing. Somebody else sent, "Actually wait, can you add hash browns?" Then, 2 minutes later, "Never mind." Then, 30 seconds after that, "Actually yes if it's not a hassle." I was sitting in my car in the parking lot writing drink orders on the back of an envelope like I had accidentally joined a service industry internship. The total came out just over $40. I paid because the line was long, people were waiting, and I didn't want to stand there asking a series of grown adults to transfer me breakfast money before 8:15 in the morning. That was mistake number 2. I came into the office with one of those cardboard trays that feel like they were designed by people who hate wrists, plus a greasy paper bag of sandwiches, and the reaction was immediate. People swarmed. That's the word. Swarmed. Not one at a time. Not politely. They gathered around my desk like I had brought in free holiday catering. And that was the moment something in me registered the real problem. Nobody reached for their phone first. Nobody said, "What do I owe you?" They reached for the food. Jess handed me a 5 for a drink that cost more than 6 and said, "I'll get you tomorrow." Kevin gave me $5 for an order that was closer to 8, then physically turned away while I was still holding the receipt. Ashley smiled and said she'd Venmo me the second I sat down. Greg did the fake pocket pat thing like a sitcom husband who had misplaced his own adulthood. By lunch, I had recovered less than half. By end of day, I was still floating a balance big enough to be irritating and small enough to make me sound petty if I brought it up too often. That is the sweet spot of office exploitation. Too little to feel worth a formal confrontation. Too regular not to become a pattern. And the whole rest of that day, people behaved as if the transaction was complete. Not financially. Socially. Jess thanked me twice and complimented my earrings. Kevin stopped by to talk about a client call for 10 whole minutes without mentioning the money he still owed. Ashley sent me a heart emoji instead of a payment. A heart emoji. Thursday morning I told myself I wasn't going to make a whole thing out of it. That sentence should be engraved on the gravestone of every office people pleaser in America. I'm not going to make a whole thing out of it. What it usually means is, I'm about to let this continue because I'm more afraid of seeming difficult than the other person is of seeming cheap. So I stopped for my own coffee as usual and walked in with one drink in my hand. Kevin looked up immediately. No run today? Not, "Hey, I owe you." Not, "Sorry about yesterday." Not even, "Did everyone pay you back?" Just disappointment. Like a service had briefly gone offline. I said, "Nope. Just mine." He frowned like that was mildly inconvenient for him. Then Jess leaned around her monitor and asked, "You going tomorrow?" That question changed the temperature in the room for me. Because if she'd asked whether I happened to be stopping there, that would have sounded normal. But, "You going tomorrow?" carried something else. Routine. Expectation. Availability. Like my commute had become a shared resource. That night I sat at my kitchen table and went through the office one person at a time. Who had paid? Who had rounded down? Who had promised tomorrow? Who had forgotten? Who had thanked me warmly enough to make it socially awkward to ask again? The total still hanging out there was under $30. I stared at the number for a long time and realized I was looking at the wrong column. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about how many separate adults had each decided a small debt to me did not count as a real debt. That kind of thing only happens when people don't think of what you did as labor in the first place. Friday, I tried an experiment. I texted only Nina and Josh. Nina worked in project coordination and had one of those practical adult brains that makes you trust her near deadlines and power tools. Josh was in compliance, wore quarter zips like a personality trait, and treated reimbursements like sacred law. I asked what they wanted. They replied in under a minute. They sent money immediately. Not later. Not, "When I sit down." Not, "I only have cash." Not, "I got you tomorrow." Immediately. I brought their drinks in with mine, handed them over, and the whole exchange took maybe 90 seconds. No chasing. No mental ledger. No weird social fog afterward. That was the moment the story stopped being about coffee and turned into something uglier. Because now I had a control group. It wasn't that buying coffee for coworkers was inherently a problem. It was that certain people assumed the friction belonged to me. That was the first time I asked myself a harder question. Was this the first time I'd been put in that role, or just the first time someone had attached a price tag obvious enough for me to notice? Unfortunately, once I asked that question, the answer came fast. I worked in billing coordination at a restoration company, which meant my job description sounded more contained than my actual days ever were. Officially, I handled invoice flow, claims paperwork, vendor reconciliation, and account cleanup. In reality, I also knew where everything was, who hadn't signed what, how to get the old copier to print double-sided without a meltdown, which meeting room had the working HDMI cable, and how to reorder toner before the machine started screaming at everyone in medieval Latin. That sort of competence becomes dangerous in an office if you are also female, reasonably pleasant, and bad at letting small things stay broken when you could fix them in 2 minutes. Because then people start handing you the edges of their lives. Can you print this? Can you pass the birthday card? Can you grab forks? Can you order lunch? Can you text the group? Can you bring napkins? Can you remind everybody? Can you just, that phrase? Can you just? It's the perfect exploitation phrase because it shrinks the task before you can react to the accumulation. I started seeing it everywhere after the coffee incident. The birthday cards I'd bought and quietly fronted when people forgot cash. The sandwich trays I'd ordered for meetings and been repaid in vague gratitude. The office supplies I'd picked up once because the shipment was late and everyone acted like I had saved civilization. The sympathy flowers. The cold medicine runs. The emergency tape, batteries, safety pins, paper cups, and ibuprofen I somehow always seemed to have. None of it was officially mine. All of it drifted toward me. And because I rarely made people feel bad about the drift, it had slowly become part of my office identity. Not Mara, who does billing. Mara, who handles things. The coffee only hurt because it turned that role into math. On Monday, I stopped texting the group. On Tuesday, I started coming in through the side entrance. On Wednesday, I poured my coffee into a travel mug in the parking lot before I came inside. That should tell you how bad the social energy had gotten. Not because anyone was screaming. Because they were doing something much more office-like. They were rewriting me. Brent started with the little comments first. Guess coffee's members only now. Careful, she charges interest. I miss old Mara. I almost respected that last one for how efficient it was. One sentence. No open aggression. But loaded with exactly the right poison. There used to be a version of you more useful to us, and this version is worse. Jess was harder. Because Jess wasn't openly selfish in the way Brent was. She was socially selfish. The kind of person who thinks warmth offsets imbalance. She'd compliment my sweater. Bring me half a muffin. Tell me a funny story from the weekend. And still somehow never fully settle what she owed me, financially or otherwise. One Wednesday, she came over with a spreadsheet question, waited until I'd helped her, then asked, casually, so, are you doing the coffee thing tomorrow or what? I looked at her and said, no. She blinked. Then smiled a little. Wow. Well, what? She lowered her voice and leaned against the edge of my cubicle like this was suddenly intimate. I don't know. It just feels like you're making a point. That sentence stayed with me because it explained the whole office mindset. The debt wasn't the point. The discomfort wasn't the point. The fact that I had been fronting money and effort wasn't the point. My refusal was the point. Because once a person is framed as naturally helpful, boundaries start looking like personal messages. I asked her, did it feel like I was making a point when people didn't pay me back? She looked genuinely surprised. Not guilty. Surprised. Like the possibility that those two things connected had honestly not occurred to her. I mean, she said slowly, that's not really on me though. And there it was. That distributed accountability trick people do in groups. Nobody feels responsible because the whole thing was built socially, not directly. Maybe she wasn't the most guilty person in the room. But she had absolutely benefited from the assumption that I'd smooth the edges of everybody else's morning. The more I pulled back, the more the office adjusted around my absence like it was an inconvenience instead of a correction. That's the thing nobody tells you: people don't notice a favor while it's happening. They notice the hole it leaves when it stops. Priya was the first person to say the quiet part out loud. We were in the break room, and I was telling her I felt ridiculous for caring this much over what, on paper, still sounded like stupid coffee money. She looked at me and said, "You're not mad about the money. You're mad because the money proved they don't think your effort counts as real effort." That hit so hard I had to put my yogurt down. Because yes. Exactly. If they had thought it was real effort, they would have paid without needing to be chased. They would have asked what they owed before touching the tray. They would have seen the receipt, the line, the time, the carrying, the ordering, the balancing, the fact that I had turned part of my commute into their convenience. Instead, most of them behaved like coffee had appeared through weather. The next escalation came from the group chat. One Monday morning, the office was already in a mood. Client visit. Copy room backed up. 2 people late. 1 manager out sick. Everybody under-caffeinated and acting like that was somehow a collective emergency. At 8:35, Kayla dropped into the work chat, "Anybody doing coffee?" No one answered for a few seconds. Then Brent wrote, "Didn't Mara usually pass there anyway?" That sentence did more damage than any outright insult. Because it froze the whole thing into writing. Not as a favor. As routine. I stared at the message. Then Brent added, "Guess not LOL." That LOL made me angrier than the first line. The way adults try to wrap entitlement in humor so they can punish you and still keep plausible deniability. I typed, "I was never the office coffee system." The chat went completely quiet. Then Kayla sent, "Damn okay," and that was how the story officially changed shape. Not because my message was rude. Because it made visible something everyone had been benefiting from without naming. By lunch, I had heard 3 different versions of the same reaction: "She's really making this a thing. It's not that serious. She's got an attitude now." There it was. Exactly on schedule. The moment I stopped offering, the narrative turned into personality. Not, people took advantage. Not, there was an imbalance. Not, we all got a little too comfortable. No. I had changed. I had become difficult. I had an attitude. That is how systems protect themselves. They turn your withdrawal into your character flaw. That night I went home and made a list. Not because I planned to march into HR waving receipts. Because I needed to know whether I was crazy. Coffee reimbursements. Lunch orders. Birthday card money. Meeting snacks. Supply runs. Sympathy flowers. Pharmacy pickups. Holiday potluck extras. The random paper plates and cutlery I'd bought twice in 1 year because apparently nobody else in the building had ever seen a grocery store. I pulled bank statements. Old texts. Venmo history. Receipts from my glove compartment. When I totaled everything I had fronted or quietly absorbed over the previous year, it came out to just over $200. Not life-changing. Not dramatic enough for television. Exactly the kind of amount that lets everyone else shrug while still meaning they've spent the year using you as a floating petty cash system. That number didn't devastate me. What devastated me was realizing how much of it I would never have thought to count if the coffee incident hadn't made the pattern undeniable. That's how normalized the role had become. I wasn't just being used by them. I had started narrating the use as normal too. The turning point, weirdly, came from Monica. Monica worked in contracts, wore mostly black, and had the kind of clean, unimpressed presence that made even her eyeliner look managerial. We weren't close, but we respected each other from a distance in the way women often do when they can tell the other one knows how offices actually work. One Thursday morning, Brent stopped by my desk and said, loudly enough for nearby people to hear, "So are you in witness protection from the coffee place now or what?" I smiled thinly and kept typing. After he walked away, Monica appeared at the edge of my cubicle and asked, "Does he owe you money?" I laughed. "Among other things." She nodded once. Then said, "I thought you were overreacting until I watched him ask you for breakfast while still talking about how he forgot to pay back facilities for the retirement cake." That sentence changed everything. Because it took me out of isolation. Someone else had seen the same glitch. Someone not emotionally invested. Someone not part of the coffee crowd. Someone who didn't start out on my side. I said, "It's not just coffee." She raised an eyebrow. So I handed her the folded list. She read the whole thing in silence. Then she looked up and said, "Oh. This is a system." That was the word I had needed. Not an annoyance. Not a misunderstanding. A system. It had inputs, assumptions, beneficiaries, social punishments, and a built-in story for why I was unreasonable if I disrupted it. Monica didn't become my savior after that. She became something better. A witness with a spine. In meetings, if someone asked me to order lunch because I was already good at keeping track, Monica would say, "Why, Mara?" If someone dropped a birthday card on my desk and said, "Can you circulate this?" Monica would pick it up and say, "I'll start with my row." When Greg yelled across the room one morning, "Any coffee heroes today?" Monica said, without looking up, "The app is free and your phone appears charged." I almost choked. Because that's all it took. Not a speech. Just enough resistance to make the old reflex stop feeling invisible. Unfortunately, resistance made a few people uglier before it made anything better. Brent escalated from teasing into that mean office mode where everything is technically a joke until someone finally names it. Careful, don't ask Mara to do anything unless you've got collateral. Can't afford her rates. Somebody get legal, I think there's an invoice coming. People laughed sometimes. Not big laughs. The small unsafe ones. The ones that mean nobody wants to be the next target. Jess was more disappointing. Because instead of going openly hostile, she went emotionally wounded. She stopped coming by just to chat. Started answering me with clipped little okays. Once, when I helped her fix a spreadsheet issue, she said, "Thanks. I know I'm apparently a burden now." That one made me cold. Because it was such a perfect manipulation of the whole situation. Not, "I benefited from you." But, "You've made me feel bad for existing." I said, "You weren't a burden when I thought it was temporary." She stared. I kept going. "You became one when everybody decided it was just my job to keep making things easy." She walked away without answering. The actual rupture came on a Tuesday morning before a client training. The breakfast order for the visiting team had gotten missed. Dana, our department manager, came out of her office already tense and asked if anyone could run out quickly and fix it. 3 people looked directly at me. Not because I volunteered. Not because I was nearest. Pure reflex. I swear even Dana noticed it, because her face changed when she followed the line of sight. She looked at me and asked, "Do you normally handle this?" And because by then I was too tired to sugarcoat the truth, I said, "Only when I make the mistake of saying yes." Brent laughed. Dana didn't. She looked around the room and said, "Conference room. Now. Whole team." That room was the first time I saw Dana as a real manager instead of just someone good at scheduling around chaos. And to be fair to reality, she did not start off on my side. She started off irritated. Because to Dana, At first glance, this was exactly the kind of office nonsense middle managers hate most, petty enough to seem embarrassing, real enough to be contagious. She asked, "Why is coffee becoming a team issue?" Not, "Who's taking advantage?" Not, "Who owes what?" Just, "Why is this now my problem?" And I get that. Because from a distance, it did sound stupid. So I said exactly that. It sounds stupid because everyone only notices the dollars. They're not noticing the pattern. Then I told the truth. About the coffee. About the money. About the underpayments, the forgetfulness, the group chat assumptions, the way "Mara's already stopping" had become office shorthand for "Mara will manage the friction." Then I handed her the list. I had not planned to. That matters. I wasn't staging a reveal. I was done narrating my own experience from memory while people who benefited from it sat there looking bored. Dana read the page. Then she looked up and asked, "Is this accurate?" Before I could answer, Monica said, "Conservative, probably." That helped more than anything else in the room. Dana turned to Brent first. "Do you owe Mara money?" Brent gave the worst possible response. He laughed. "We're seriously doing this over breakfast?" Dana didn't raise her voice. That made it worse for everyone. "We're doing this over repeated unreimbursed spending, informal labor being assigned by habit, and the apparent assumption that one employee's time and money are communal until she develops what some of you are calling an attitude." The room went dead. Jess looked down. Kayla looked embarrassed. Greg looked annoyed. Brent looked like a man who had just discovered his whole personality depended on never hearing a sentence said that clearly in a room with witnesses. Dana kept going. "No one is the default for personal errands. No one is to front money for group orders unless they choose to. If there is a team order, it gets prepaid. And if any of you are unclear on the difference between gratitude and reimbursement, now would be a good time to stop being unclear." That was the line. Not flashy. Not theatrical. But sharp enough to redraw the whole office. After the meeting, Dana pulled me aside. And this is where I think the story became more honest than if I had just written her as my instant hero. She said, "I thought this was going to be you being fed up over $20. I said, "That's what everyone thinks." She nodded. Then I read the list. She looked tired. A little ashamed. Very managerial. And then she said something I respected. "I should have noticed sooner that people were routing low-level logistics to you by default." That mattered. Because it named the real thing. Not coffee. Not breakfast. Routing. The office had built little convenience roads, and most of them ended at me. Dana changed the policy that day. No more informal group food runs fronted by staff. No more expecting one person to collect money later. If someone wanted to organize breakfast, orders had to be prepaid digitally before pickup or not placed at all. No one would be the default person for supplies, cards, lunches, or errands without explicit rotation and reimbursement. It sounds tiny. It was not. Because once you formalize a convenience, all the hidden friction suddenly becomes visible. And the office hated it. The next group breakfast order was a disaster. People missed the payment cutoff. 2 drinks got ordered wrong because nobody read the thread carefully. Greg complained that the system was hostile. Brent forgot to pay before pickup and spent the whole morning acting persecuted because nobody brought his sandwich. Jess sent her money late and got quietly left out, then had to walk downstairs herself. And for the first time everyone felt what had once quietly landed on me. Not the money. The management. That was deeply satisfying. Not because I'm vindictive. Because accuracy feels good after a long stretch of social distortion. Jess repaid me the next day. Cash. Folded once. Set on my desk without eye contact. I really didn't realize, she said. I looked at the bills, then at her, and said, that was the problem. She nodded. Didn't argue. Didn't cry. Didn't ask for absolution. That, honestly, was enough. Brent never apologized. Of course he didn't. Men like Brent don't apologize when access gets revoked. They just act like the atmosphere changed for no reason. The last time he tried me was about a month later. He stopped by my desk on a rainy Thursday and said, with that same easy shameless grin, any chance you can make one exception and grab me a breakfast sandwich if you go? I'll actually pay this time. I looked at him for a second. Then I said, the store didn't move when I stopped going for you. He stared. Then laughed like I was dramatic. But he walked away. That was enough. Nothing magical happened after that. No office-wide reckoning. No heartfelt group email about invisible labor. No corporate workshop on how women get turned into informal infrastructure. Real life is less generous than that. What happened instead was smaller and, in some ways, better. The office adjusted. People started ordering for themselves. Or going without. Or organizing little clumsy prepaid runs where suddenly everyone learned how annoying 10 breakfast orders are before 9 in the morning. A couple people stopped asking me for random favors at all, which I counted as spiritual healing. Monica kept slicing entitlement into thin professional strips every time it tried to grow back. Priya and Josh still texted me sometimes if I was stopping, and they still sent money before I got to the speaker. That detail mattered. Because the story was never about whether I minded helping. It was about whether help was still help once people started treating it like my natural setting. Convenient is not the same as generous. That sentence stayed with me. So did another one, nobody notices a favor until it stops. That's true in offices. In families. In friendships. In relationships. Anywhere one person gets rewarded for making friction disappear. People don't notice the card you bought, the lunch you fronted, the coffee you carried, the forks you remembered, the room you reset, the little patch of competence you kept laying over everybody else's carelessness. They notice the silence after it's gone. And sometimes they call that silence attitude because it's easier than calling it labor. I still stop for coffee most mornings. Same road. Same light. Same place. Sometimes I still bring one for Priya or Josh if they text early enough and send the money immediately. One morning, Greg saw Josh walk back with a coffee and called across the room, "Wait, why does he get one?" Josh didn't even slow down. He just said, "Because I know how apps work." Half the room laughed. Including Dana, which was maybe the most satisfying part. Because by then, the story had changed. Not, Mara's difficult. Not, Mara has an attitude. Not even, Mara doesn't do coffee anymore. It had become the truth. I wasn't the coffee girl. I was just the first person to stop pretending convenience was free.